Can you imagine being found guilty of a crime you didn't commit, then spending 30 years in a cell waiting to be executed by the electric chair? For us, it's the stuff of nightmares, but for Anthony Ray Hinton, for 3 decades, it was a hellish reality. Birmingham, Alabama, 1985. Anthony Ray Hinton was 29 years of age and living at home with his mother.
Didn't have nothing to complain about. I had a mother and a father, and my father worked in the coal mine, and one day a rock fell on him and hit him in the top of the head, and he lost his memory. And so my mom became my mother and father. My father spent the rest of his life in psychiatric ward, and so my mom brought me up.
What was your mother like?
Oh, she was, I call her, she was hard but fair. Had enough love to smother you, and she gave me unconditional love. And I think I'm the person today simply because of the love that my mom showed me and gave me.
Was she a tough woman?
Woo, yes. As I said, she was a lovable mother, but she was tough, and she mean what she say. If she say do something, it wasn't that you had a choice. You did what she said.
And did you come from a poor family, Anthony, or what way were you off?
I came from a poor family, and I say that because we didn't have much money, but I have to be honest with you. I never went a day without eating. I never lived anywhere that I didn't have a place to lay my head. My mom always provided. And so poor, money-wise, I could say yes. But love in a family, I was rich, then rich.
This is the Hinton family home, where one day Anthony's life would change forever while standing here in his front garden. Bring me back to that day in 1985. It was a summer's day, hot July day, and your mom had asked you to go out and cut the grass.
Yes, it was perhaps the hottest day that I could ever remember in July in Alabama. And I had went inside and asked my mom. She was making some lemonade, and I poured me a glass of lemonade, and she asked me, "Are you going to revival tonight?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she looked at the clock on the wall and she said, "Well, you got time to go out there and cut that grass." And I dropped my head in disgust. I wanted to say, "Mama, do you know how hot it is out there?" I looked up at my mom and I said, "Mama, I promise you I'll cut that grass tomorrow." And my mom looked at me and she said, "I'm trying my best to see how did you get. You'll cut the grass tomorrow out of me telling you to go cut the grass." And she said, "Boy, you better get out there and cut that grass."
And as the Alabama sun blazed down on Anthony, he slowly mowed the lawn until he was interrupted by 2 state troopers.
I looked up and there stood 2 white gentlemen that I didn't know, didn't recognize. I cut the lawnmower off and I said, "Can I help you?" And they said, "We're looking for Anthony Ray Hinton." And I said, "I'm Anthony Ray Hinton, how can I help you?" And they identified themselves as 2 detectives from the Birmingham Police Department. And I said, "Okay, how can I help you?" And they said, "We have a warrant for your arrest." And that day turned into 30 years of pure hell.
He was taken into the police car and driven to the station. Along the way, Anthony kept asking why he was being arrested.
He said, "We arrested you for first-degree robbery, first-degree kidnapping, and first-degree attempted murder." I said, "Oh, you got the wrong person. I ain't done none of that." And he looked at me with the meanest, coldest eyes. He said, "Let me tell you something right now. I don't care whether you did it or didn't do it." He said, "Number 1, you black. Number 2, a white man is gonna say you shot him." He said, "Number 3, you're gonna have a white judge. Number 4, you're gonna have a white prosecutor. And number 5, you're gonna have an all-white jury." And he said, "Do you know what that spells?" And he repeated the word conviction 5 times.
You must have been thinking, Anthony, though, still, there's no way justice will prevail. It's going to go to court. They will find that I am innocent.
My mom brought me up to believe in this system. My mom always told me if something was wrong, always find a police officer. And so I grew up believing that police officers was the good guys. I grew up believing that they was your protector.
When it went to trial, you were given a state attorney who wasn't really interested in the case and just wanted to get it done as quickly as possible. And he told you, what was it? Oh, yeah, you claim you're innocent. He didn't even believe you.
No. First of all, he said I did not go to law school to do pro bono work. All of y'all, referring to all blacks, y'all always doing something and then saying you didn't do it. That's what I had to go to trial with. This is the man that I had to somehow try to convince that I was innocent. This is a man that I had to somehow try to convince that I need you to give me your best. I'm innocent.
Remember, this was 1985, and although it had been 30 years since Rosa Parks and the Black Civil Rights Movement in the nearby city of Montgomery, racism in Alabama was still rife. Anthony was accused of killing 2 fast food restaurant workers during 2 separate robberies earlier that year. Investigators claimed a survivor at a 3rd restaurant robbery picked Anthony out of a photo lineup. There were no fingerprints or eyewitness testimony. Anthony had a solid alibi as he was at work at the time of the murders, which could be verified. The only evidence linking him to the killings were bullets and his mother's revolver. It all came down to the gun, didn't it, and the
Yes.
bullet, and whether the bullet that was found in the victims matched the gun in your mother's house. And the state had their own ballistics expert who said it did.
Yes.
And then they gave you the chance to get your own ballistics expert, but because you didn't have a lot of money,
Right.
again, like the lawyer, the state appointed the ballistics expert, but this guy wasn't really an expert.
No. He was a civil engineer, was blind in one eye. And at the time in 1985, the microscope calls for 2 lenses and you had to look through both of them. And he only could look through one of them. And when he got on the stand, the prosecutor ate him up.
Anthony's ballistics expert even needed help to turn on the microscope. When asked if he could see the bullet properly through the lens, he replied no. Anthony had taken a lie detector test and passed it, but the judge declined to allow the jury to hear the polygraph results. The prosecutor had a documented history of racial bias, and during the trial said he could tell Anthony was guilty and evil just by looking at him. Anthony's fate was sealed, and the jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death by electrocution. What went through your head, Anthony, when you heard the verdict being read out that you were guilty and being sentenced to death?
I lost my sight for a second. I never will forget, my niece was sitting behind me, and I looked back to make sure she was okay, and I couldn't see her. And it wasn't until I turned back around and I kind of shook my head and looking back up at the judge, and that's when my sight came back. But to hear that you've been found guilty of a crime you know you didn't commit, and then to hear that I sentence you to death, I think it was enough for any innocent person to lose their sight.
For the next 30 years, Anthony was on death row in Jefferson County Jail, where every day he was reminded of the fate that awaited him.
I was 30 feet away from the death chamber, and every time they executed someone, the smell of that human flesh would come up in your cell, and you couldn't get it out of your nostrils for a day. And
did you know when the executions were happening?
yes. We would beat on the wall, bang on the doors for the inmate to let them know that we were still there and they had somebody on their side. We didn't know whether they had family members or friends. It was just our way of being with that person until the very end. We didn't mean to any disrespect for the family. We just wanted to condemn to know that you still had somebody that cared about you.
So that person who was sitting in the death chair would have been hearing the faint banging from other cells, just
yes,
you
absolutely.
saying, we're still here with you.
Yes, and some of the officers would tell us that they would kind of smile as best as they could because of the banging, and they knew that it was us, and we did it because death row is all you have, is each other. And no one is there condemning you, no one is there making judgment of you. Every man there had been found guilty by a jury, and I was no different. I knew I was innocent, but yet telling them I was innocent didn't do any good.
I remember reading you said the lights would flicker.
Yes. That's when they throw on the generator and pull the switch to the chair. And it took so much electricity, the lights would just blink on and off. And when they come back on full bright, we knew that the execution was over. And I used to sit there and wonder what evil person could have thought of making an electric chair.
What did you do to escape reality in the prison?
Well, I used my mind to believe that I was free. I told my mind that I had to escape, and I couldn't escape physically, so I let my mind escape mentally. And I escaped, and I went to England, met the Queen. I had tea with the Queen, and we sit down and we talked. And
this was vivid for you, this was
absolutely,
real?
Absolutely.
Every day you'd sit in your cell and imagine these scenarios
yes.
and these journeys. Were you losing your mind?
Well, the guards thought I was, but I couldn't do a thing about being where I was. But I didn't have to believe I was there. And so with my mind, I was able to escape a place of hell. And I escaped it by going out to dinner. I played basketball for the Knicks. I played baseball for the Yankees. I played Wimbledon and won 5 straight years. And I often tell people to this day, the only thing that makes me sad is that I won Wimbledon 5 straight years, and I have yet to receive my Rolex watch. And I think Wimbledon should send me my Rolex watch.
Well, they might be watching this now, you might get it. So. What about your mother, Anthony? Did she come and visit you when you were in prison?
She did. You know, the first 3 years I didn't say a word to any human being. I was so full of anger and so disappointed in the God that I was brought up to believe. And when my mom comes, she would talk, and I wouldn't say a word. I'd just say, mm-hmm. And she would say, you ain't feeling good? And I just shake my head, and somehow I got through it. And I didn't want my mother to know that I really was worried. And I think the love that I have for my mom, I was trying to protect her. And every time I would call home, my mom just only had one question: when are they gonna let you go? And I would always tell her, they're working on it real soon. And I lied to my mom up to the time she passed.
She never lived to see the day that you were released. She died when you were in prison?
Yes. She passed September the 22nd in 2007. And I don't think nobody could fully understand that the person you love more than life, that gave you everything that she had, she deserved it better than to see her son put in a cage like an animal. The day that I learned that my mom had passed, to be honest with you, I didn't care whether I live or die.
Throughout his time in prison, Anthony had been able to get in touch with a lawyer called Brian Stevenson from the Equal Justice Initiative. They commissioned a re-examination of the bullets and gun at the centre of the trial by 3 different experts. These were retired experts from the Dallas County Crime Laboratory and the FBI, with decades of experience between them. All 3 experts testified that they could not conclude any of the bullets had been fired from the gun, the only evidence Anthony was convicted on. For the next 16 years, attorney Brian Stevenson tried in vain to persuade the state of Alabama to re-examine the evidence, and eventually in 2015, the US Supreme Court ruled that Anthony was entitled to a new hearing. A judge then ordered that Anthony be released that very day, which was another hot, sunny day in Birmingham, Alabama.
The sun was shining brighter than it ever had shined, and I looked up at it and it seemed like it was just shining on me, like a spotlight. It was as though I was walking on clouds, to be able to say I'm free. I was happy and sad because the person that I thought should have been there wasn't there, and that was my mom.
How do you rebuild your life? 30 years, you didn't have money saved up, you didn't have a family. What do you do?
You have to believe in God. You have to believe that He will make a way for you. You can't get back the 30 years that they took from me. I'm not bitter because they took what they could. They took 30 years of my life, and that's all I'm allowed them to take. I cannot afford to give them anything more. And I often say the joy that I have, the world didn't give it to me, and the world can't take it away. Every man, every woman have to one day give an deed and count for what they done. My job is to love, to respect, and to live life to the fullness as I best can.
Today, Anthony is speaking to more than 3,000 first-year students at St. John's University in Queens, New York. He now travels the country advocating for the abolishment of the death penalty and talking about forgiveness and healing. And for the record, the state of Alabama has never apologized or compensated Anthony in any way.
Today we have a justice system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty, and if you're poor and innocent. I need you to help me stand up and say, we're going to make some changes. We're going to make a difference.
Finally, Anthony, when you look back at the 30 years you spent in prison and the awful wrongful conviction that you were a victim of, when you look at Lady Justice holding the balanced scales, what do you think?
Lady Justice is not blind. She have on a blindfold, but she can see. She see what race you are, what gender you are. She see what college you go to. She know exactly how much money you have in the bank. She know what neighborhood you live in, and she put all that together. And if you find yourself in her courtroom, all of that she already knows has already been determined, whether you're gonna be found guilty or not guilty. It's a fact.
How are you today, Anthony?
I'm fine, and thank you for asking, but every day I get up with a smile because I'm free. And I often look up and I thank God for waking me up, and I thank God for freeing me from that 30 years of pure hell that I was in.
You can thank God. You
Absolutely.
still have strong faith?
Absolutely. I truly believe in it. Absolutely.
Well, it was a pleasure meeting you, Anthony, and thank you so much for sharing your story with me.
Thank you so much. I had to learn how to forgive. And then when I learned how to forgive, I felt free. You see, I learned that forgiveness is not about the other person. Forgiveness is truly about you. Always remain true to your faith. Thank you so much for inviting me here today.
For EWTN News at St. John's University in Queens, New York, I'm Colm Flynn.